Survivor Specialist Phil and Alexa are back with our third episode of Winning Survivor. Today we're going to be talking about Vanuatu to Panama, and once again we are joined by Once Upon an Island, Wes, making his third appearance, and he hasn't gotten tired of us yet. I'm proud of him. He keeps making the cool logos too. Everything's looking good. Tonight we're going to be talking about Chris Doherty, as Wes would say. Don't confuse him with Chris Daughtry.
No, don't.
Please don't.
One letter in between the names, too.
Crazy.
You would mix it up.
We were watching, I have a quick side story about Survivor Vanuatu. I was watching this in college with my roommate, and we were just watching it, and he was assuming Chris was going to go home early, whatever, just because he's Chris. We had watched the first episode, and for some reason, he looked up American Idol that night, and it was our freshman year of college. It was 2010. Why are you looking up American Idol in 2010? And he looked it up, and he saw Chris Daughtry, and then it said underneath Chris Doherty, like as like an other, and it said Survivor winner, and he was like, "There's no way that guy wins," and I was like, "How did you spoil that for yourself?"
It's kind of like when you Google. I've seen people on Reddit have been doing this. People have been Googling Amber Burkich, name pronounced potentially incorrectly, and it's this like blonde lawyer from Florida, and everyone's like, "Well, that's the girl who won Survivor All Stars."
I love it.
I was watching a movie with my wife yesterday, or maybe 2 days ago, and it's based on a true story. And we're like halfway through, and it's about like this dude and his wife dies at like near the end of the movie, and I didn't know that. And she's just looking up. She's like, "Yeah." She's like, and his wife dies. And I'm like, "Wait, what?" And she's totally ruined it, and I had no idea. And I'm like, the rest of the movie, I'm like, I already know what's gonna happen. Why did you do this to me?
Go ahead, Alexa.
I was gonna say, just to potentially spoil myself, what was the movie? And for the
I still believe it's Jeremy Camp writes this amazing song after his wife dies, and then he gets married again. So I knew about his second wife, but I thought that was the wife that didn't die because I didn't think she died, but she did.
Everyone, tune in next week for us to continue spoiling movies. For all of you.
I will say, as somebody who knows
Survivor winners commentary,
as somebody who knows nothing about Jeremy Camp, I knew that his first wife died, so that's not a spoiler to me at all. But I will say that while that's not a spoiler to most people, Chris winning Survivor Season 9, if you didn't know that right now, I am so sorry that you listened to the beginning of this podcast, because Chris does win Season 9, and it's an unbelievable comeback. We'll talk all about him. We're also going to be talking about Tom Westman from Palau, Danni Boatwright, who we just saw, who was the first returnee from Survivor Guatemala, and, of course, Aras Baskauskas, I've been told is how it's spelled. Baskauskas.
Yeah. I don't think there's the SH. I think it's Baskauskas, but TBD.
So, according to the Survivor Wiki, his last name is pronounced Baskauskas.
Yikes.
Yeah.
You really
what you do?
Not great.
This is when you go full like Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, where it's like Aras, brother of Vetus, and that is like that is all we're doing. Yeah,
Panama.
Winner of Panama. Yeah, I love that. That's it. And we just ignore the fact that he even has a last name. So we're gonna be talking all about all of them, and of course we're gonna be starting off with Chris. If you haven't watched our first 2 episodes, go back and watch our first 2 episodes. Listen to our first 2 episodes. They're up on Spotify. They're up on iTunes. All of that. We talk about the first 8 winners in Survivor history. But tonight we're talking about the other 4, and Alexa and I are obviously gonna have a lot to say about Vanuatu, considering both of us have put it in our top 5 over and over and over again, much to the chagrin of a lot of people out here. But I want to hear Wes first, because Alexa, you and I are going to be talking a lot about Chris for sure. Wes, how do you feel about Chris as a winner?
You know what? Chris at first it's like he's a little off-putting when you hear the tale. If you haven't watched the season yet, but you hear how when he wins, he goes, "Yeah," at everyone, but they had to edit that out, and you're like, "Oh, this is an edgy winner." And he just, I don't know, man. Like, he's the first underdog since Vesepia. I try to think back. I don't think anyone else was like true. I mean, maybe Jenna in the Amazon. I don't view her as the same kind of underdog. She wasn't really an underdog till the finale. He was like an underdog for like half the season. So Chris's underdog story is very impressive. And I did note he only got votes in the premiere. I thought that was very impressive. He didn't get votes the rest of the game, despite being like should have been the obvious target for the whole second half. So, I mean,
it makes it so good. He's the winner with the absolute worst premiere of all time.
Of all time.
Yeah.
And,
no question.
And people will try to say that that could possibly be Nick Wilson, but Chris should have been the first boot on this season. And you were saying, Wes, he should have, you know, he was an easy boot for the second half of the season. He should have been an easy boot at every tribal council. He blew that first challenge. in this season. Once again, it's the second time they did men versus women. The men lost the first challenge because of a balance beam, and it's this construction worker, overweight guy who cannot get across the balance beam, and all the young fit guys are like, cool, let's get rid of him.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening? He comes out with one of the best opening winner quotes of all time, and I'm going to just completely misrepresent it, so if anybody knows it, but he says, it's not out here to outbalance. I'm out here to outwit and outplay. And it's just, it's like, that's what he's here to do. And he forms the Fat Five right away and then doesn't get into trouble until the women just decimate the men on this season.
And that's what's so interesting about his win. He starts off confident and then he gets cocky, but nobody knows that he's cocky. And we've talked about this a lot, where he's cocky to us, but not so much to the other players. But then when you go back and watch near the end, when he's the only guy left and he strolls into tribal council every single week and a woman goes home every single time, he's got the biggest crap-eating grin on his face. And like you said, Wes, he drops an F yeah as soon as he wins. Some would call it off-putting. To me, the more off-putting part is a lot of his other quotes, which come a little bit later about women. Everyone talks about how Amazon doesn't age well. A lot of Chris's comments don't age really well either, but I think because, one, it's a fairly forgotten season, and two, because there's something weirdly endearing about him, it's kind of brushed off.
Did you guys know that he was voted as fan favorite of this season on the CBS website? Maybe you did, but I didn't know that till today.
No,
I looked it up.
At first glance, that kind of surprises me, but at the same time, I can't really think of who else it would be.
Apparently, it was Amy for a while. I'm looking at Survivor Wiki, by the way. This isn't like some secret information I have. Apparently, it was Amy, and then at some point in the season, Chris became the fan favorite. It was probably the point where he became the underdog, if I had to guess.
Yeah, and I will say too, Alexa, I wanted to go back to like you had said with the comments, and I do think that, Chris obviously said some things that nobody's excited about nowadays, but I also think that that again, like when we were talking about Amazon, I was saying how it was fun and like everybody was having fun with it. I mean, as much as Rob Sesternino goes goo-goo over all those girls the entire season, every one of them is also playing. Heidi says her strategy was to be like, here's my boobs. This is it. This is like, that was her strategy. And that's why, Alexa, you and I both think that she's a very underrated player. And I think it's kind of the same thing with this. Chris says some things where you're like, what is going on? But at the same time, because it's all coming true on the season, they kind of have to keep it in, because when he's saying you don't have to do anything, you just get a bunch of women together and they'll end up, they'll just start backstabbing or whatever his quote is. I know that one is like really bad, but at the same time, because it's exactly what happens, it's really tough to ignore it if you're an editor and you sit there and you're like, oh, I don't like that he said that. But then you're like,
how can I cover it up?
Yeah. It was true in that season.
And this season, like we talked about with Amazon last week, Amazon, like that was your first men versus women, and it's a bunch of like hot models on both sides.
Hello.
In this situation, from the guys, all of the hot guys are voted out immediately. So it's a totally different dynamic. And I don't know where I read this, but Amazon felt more like, oh, we're at a frat party, and this was men versus women.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. And one of the big things here is, I think, and this is not a knock on any of the women in the season, but they're not nearly as hot as the Amazon women, and they weren't cast to be as hot. No. I think that this season was meant to have, if you look at this season as a whole, this is like I really believe why I like Vanuatu so much is because this looks like people you see at 7-Eleven. This looks like people you see at gas stations. Like this looks like people you see
all trucker final two.
Yeah, it looks like people you see every day in your life. Whereas in Survivor Amazon, I don't see people who look like Jenna and Heidi every day. I don't see people who look like, Dave and Daniel and all that. Like you don't see people who look like that every day. So I think that's what makes Vanuatu really just like so relatable to me, is that I feel like all of this cast is just everyday, like average Joes.
I feel like this cast is probably closer, unfortunately, for comparison's sake, to Thailand, because I feel like Thailand was a lot of older people who also looked more like people you'd meet in real life. Like you said, trucker. I'm not sure if that's the word I would use, but it definitely seems more like the.
Or let me correct.
Any cast was
the two. Twyla and Chris were both, I think, highway construction workers, like an extremely specific and never again repeated job.
Yeah. It's crazy. And so like when I look at what Chris was able to do on this season, I think it's just obviously it's fascinating, and we'll talk all about what he ended up having to do in order to win this. But like when you look at who he was with, those young guys wanted nothing to do with them. They tried to kind of do it. And then the problem was the older guys weren't very good at Survivor. And we saw this a lot in the early seasons. And nowadays we always give people a hard time with, oh, they were recruited and they don't actually know the game and blah, blah. But you really think about it, other than Rob Cesternino, Chris Doherty knew the game the best out of the first 9 seasons of Survivor. And I don't think there's any doubt about that. The person who probably knew it the third best was Brooke, who's the first boot of this season. But they actually knew the game, because when you're watching these early seasons, you're like, wow, it feels so much more authentic. It feels so much pure. Like it just feels normal. But a lot of the players who were playing, they were still doing it for the same reasons that a lot of people play the game now. It's just we didn't know it as much because after the game was over, they disappeared. They didn't go on to have social media careers as influencers. They really did disappear off the face of the earth. So we didn't feel like they were there just for like the social media presence and the fame. But a lot of them were. A lot of them really were. So Chris, I give so much credit for, he knew the game better than anybody else out there. And one fun fact that I really want to throw out here to everybody. So I met Eliza once, and Eliza actually said, while we're talking about the way the cast looks, Eliza said that when she sent in her audition tape, she tried to play it up like she was the hot girl and she was going to be the hot girl on the season. And she said that they just pretty much told her like, no, Eliza, you're going to be the neurotic underdog. That's what you're going to be. And she was like, well, yeah, that's, I guess, what I really am. And like, that's what she plays in both of her seasons, which is pretty amazing for casting to call her out on that, but still know you need to put her on the season.
Look how it worked out.
I feel like Richard Hatch also has a great understanding of the game from the very first season, and even in All Stars when he's like, this game's about social relationships, and everyone's over here thinking about all these other things, but really it's about social relationships. So even though Richard Hatch is like, you know, cocky and full of himself a lot, I think he does. I put him in that group of people where you're like, they just understand the game coming in. Richard really understood the game coming in before we even knew it was a game. And I know we talked in length about him already.
That's kind of what I'm saying, though, is like Richard kind of invented it, but Cesternino studied it, and Chris studied it. Like, that's what I mean. Like, Chris knew this game inside and out. The most amazing thing about Chris, and this is why I think that his path to the win is so impressive, is at that first tribal council, Chris blew it and he got 4 votes, I believe. I think it was 5-4 was the final vote there. But he gets 4 votes. Nick Wilson, who had a hard time at the start of his season, he didn't go home because Pat got medevac. Okay, so that's like a lucky break. Good for Nick. The next time Chris was really in danger of going home was at Final 7. He didn't win immunity at Final 7. And he still did not go home and was able to put himself into a swing position. And then he continues to win immunities after that. He ends up winning, I believe it's 3 of the last 4 challenges. But he wins the one after Leanne goes home, and then he wins the last 2. But it's really impressive that the 2 times he was in the most danger, or should have been in the most danger, he had to play the game with no protection and was able to pull it off, which we very rarely see in Survivor.
He only got 3 votes in the first one. Actually, the first vote went 5 to 3 to 1. And then he received 0 votes the rest of the game. Like, what? He was the underdog. It's like Vesepia. How did they both get away with this? Like, they're like Houdini.
Absolutely.
I think it's we won't see this so much once we get into like the dark ages of the early 20s. But I think let's enjoy what we have for the next couple of weeks. But I think you see this. I think you see this more with Chris than you do with Vesepia. But when you have a crew of 8, or when you have an alliance of like between 5 and 8, and they've been together, like they never lost an immunity challenge in the pre-merge, they're sticking together. They never got the chance to get rid of the people who they actually don't like. And so once there's finally a crack, and once that person who's Chris can actually find that crack, that's when you break them up. And that's when I can say like, oh, well, I've been voting with Phil for the past 5 weeks and I can't stand him. Like, now's my chance to get rid of him.
Yeah,
even though
let's do that.
Always like, you're just like, oh, we'll get rid of Chris next week. I'll get rid of Chris next week. So it was genius of him. And I feel like that's the first time we really saw it.
And this is the first time we really saw the Final 7 get exploited. I feel like, because in the earlier seasons we never really saw it. The first 5 seasons, in the 4th season it was Final 9. In the other seasons around that, it was kind of just like we're going to vote the way we want to vote, and that's how we're going to do it. We see it in Amazon when Sesternino does go against Alex when they have the 4-3 majority. But this was the first time we really saw somebody walk in here and say, I'm now in a swing position because I was never with any of you. I made sure I was the last man standing. You got rid of Rory. You got rid of Sarge. You got rid of Chad. Now I'm the last man standing, and I'm going to see exactly where the 3 over here are, which was Eliza, Scout, and Twyla, and the 3 over here of Leanne, Amy, and Julie. And I'm going to split you right in half, and then I'm going to go from there. And then not only does he do that, he splits it at Final 7, and then he splits them at Final 5 too when he gets rid of Julie. Like, he did a really great job of always making sure that he was going to be in a position of need, which we see a lot of players not do when they need to.
Yeah.
You know what? Also, I really like, and we kind of skipped over this, but I feel like this most part of Vanuatu is the opening 2 minutes are like Jeff's on a volcano while it's exploding. How have we forgotten this? This is not like one of the greatest openings of any season. Like, why? How? Yes, more, please.
I'm pretty sure that if Jeff could go back and do the season over again, Chris would be the one standing on that volcano, and it would erupt, and Chris would fall into the volcano. I'm pretty sure, because that's another thing. We'll talk about this as we move through these 4 winners tonight. But there's 4 winners, and 3 of them have played multiple times. I personally believe Chris is the best winner out of the bunch we're going to talk about tonight, which is kind of a touchy subject there because Tom Westman plays one of the best games of all time. But I think Chris is the best winner, and he never plays again. I think a lot of that had to do with, one, Alexa, like you said, some of the comments he made, but also Jeff's comments through the first 8 seasons are all sexist, chauvinistic, misogynistic bullshit. Yeah. But he had a personal stake in this with Julie Berry. And I think that really changed Jeff's perspective, or started to change it, where it wasn't just like, oh, you're the hot girl and I can talk to you like you're. I mean, Jeff was really getting close, and I love Jeff. Everybody knows this. But Jeff was really getting close to being kind of like that creepy television host where all he needs is the Botox and the fake spray tan, and he was going to be really pushing the issue, because it was like an all boys club and any hot girl was just the hot girl. And he treated them that way. And this is the first season we really don't see that.
He found love.
Because he's dating the hot girl.
Yeah, he found love.
I think that's what it was. And I think that's why Chris ultimately has never played again. And I think that's why he kind of gets forgotten as a winner, because until you rewatch Vanuatu, you watch the first time, you're like, wow, how did he do that? But then you watch it the second time, you're like, wow, that's how he did that. And it's really a great storyline. It's the reason that I was putting in my top 5. It's the best storyline. You're watching a movie with a protagonist the entire season. And you don't see that often in Survivor. There's never really a season where you watch one protagonist have to overcome obstacle after obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. And even if you're not completely rooting for them, they actually win in the end. We don't see that often. And I just think it's phenomenal storytelling, and it's one of a kind. It really is. Vanuatu is one of a kind.
Is the first season out of the first 9? I'm sorry, it's out of the first 9 seasons. Yeah, it's the first one with a story. I feel like there are a couple other seasons, namely Worlds Apart is another one similar. But you're right, out of the first 9 seasons, this is the only one I can think of that's truly a movie almost in that case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
it's not even a forced underdog story. He literally was supposed to go home day 1. He completely sucked at that challenge and completely turned it around.
It almost happened again, basically, with David versus Goliath. Like you're saying, Nick was supposed to go home first. We hear that's what we're showing the show, at least. But by the end, he's having to do similar thing to Chris. Goliath's have him all. He's down 4-1 in the final 5, and then he has to keep overcoming all the way from that time that I think it was. I forgot who flipped, but David's were getting the upper hand, and then Goliath's got the upper hand again, and that was just never overturned. And Nick had to do the same thing Chris did, but a lot later, of course.
Yeah, and I think Chris's is easier to see too, because in the old school there weren't so many. There was no idols, there was no crazy advantages, there was nothing insane going on. Where it's harder to follow particular storylines nowadays. It's harder to be okay, like, let's just watch this one character go through everything. Like, because you're paying attention to idols, you're paying attention to extra votes, you're paying attention to idol nullifiers. It was Gabby and Christian who flipped on the Godfather, and that was the beginning of the end for the Davids. And you're paying attention to so many different things. It's hard to really follow it all. Whereas in this season, there's no distractions. It's just, man, are we really about to watch the women pick the men off one by one by one by one? And Alexa, I know you definitely would like to speak on this because she's your girl, but Amy Cusack really does create one of the most dominant alliances in the history of Survivor. She really does. It just fell apart.
Yeah, I love her. Though I rewatched that season for like the 19th time a couple months ago, and she's kind of like the John Carroll of this season. She's the ringleader of this huge alliance, and she's the one who gets too overconfident, and that's what makes it all fall apart. The way that she and her relationship with Eliza is what Chris looks at when he says, "This is exactly what I want to break up." And she's someone who I would love to see play again, because her Micronesia game was just in such a bad time in her life that I feel like she couldn't get to play the way she wanted to. But she was, to me, like the first really, really compelling villain that was a good person. And as we talk through, as we get farther and as we talk through heroes versus villains, she was a very complex, she was more of like an anti-hero. Maybe not so much, but she was a villain who wasn't a bad person. So yeah, that's what I always found super, super enthralling about her.
It kind of goes back to the same thing we were talking about with Wendell when we were talking about season 40. Amy's a villain because you need an adversary for your hero, which ultimately ends up being Chris. Chris wins the game, so he needs somebody to go head to head against, and that person he's going head to head against is Amy. And what's funny is everybody always looks at it as Amy's the one who got the boot, and she's the reason that Chris, that was the first one. It was actually Leanne who went home. Leanne goes home before Amy, and is actually the beginning of the end for the female alliance. But something we're obviously going to talk about it a lot with his final tribal, but Jeff said at the end of this game, Chris, did you tell one truth the entire game? Did you tell one truth? And I think it was fascinating that back then it was so looked down upon to lie and play the way that Chris played. I mean, we see it happen to Rob just 3 seasons previous. We see it happen to Boston Rob the season before. But to play as deviously as he did, it was seen so negatively. And in terms of what was Chris's big move, I think it was obviously what he did right at the beginning of the game. But it's amazing how at that final 7 immunity challenge, he tells his wife that he's going home there. And he kept that lie. We talked with Adam about this. He hated that people spoiled season 40. He kept that lie all the way until he won the money. His wife was convinced he was going home at final 7. And he was playing Survivor on 9 different levels. And it didn't matter that he was out of the game for 3 months by the time it aired.
That's the psycho part of it. The fact that he lied to his wife about it.
Hey, you know what? Lori is very happy. The two of them are very happy. So I guess they're doing great. But I do think the main thing we should talk about here before we move on to Tom is this final tribal council performance is the greatest final tribal council performance in the history of Survivor. And that is my opinion. I don't know if you guys can think of another one, Wes. Maybe you have one in your mind. But this final tribal is unbelievable.
So I want to point out before we move on to final tribal real quick is that I'm reading a comment on Survivor Discord about someone saying they said Scout/Twyla played great games and needed to spell out to Chris how to flip the power on the tribe. I don't remember that, but I'm guessing it's been a while though since I've watched Vanuatu start to finish. When did that happen in the season? Was that the merge?
I don't really think that was a thing. I think it was more that Chris was just talking to the two of them about I'd rather work with you. Let's get rid of Leanne and that. I think Scout and Twyla were just willing to do it. And that was Chris's opportunity. I don't think that they were like, Chris, you need to work with us. And this is how you do it. Chris was looking for the cracks, and he had built enough relationship with Twyla and Scout, and they were able to pull Eliza in. And that was how they were able to pull off the blind side of Leanne.
Yeah, that's the best vote of the entire season, because you have Scout and Twyla who never really connected with Amy, and then you have Eliza who had felt so ostracized for so long. Yet Scout and Twyla and Eliza did not particularly like each other. But still ended up voting together, and that's something you never see.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, you think about this. Here's a guy who has to sit at final tribal. And the guys were going to vote for him no matter what. I mean, Sarge was going to vote for him, and Chad was going to vote for him. There was no doubt about that. But he then had to convince Eliza and Julie to vote for him. He had to get a vote from one of the other women. He wasn't going to get Scout's vote. That was going to Twyla. We all knew that was going to happen. And then he had to get Leanne or Amy. This was not easy for him to do.
No.
And what he did at this final tribal, I think, is one of this. It is just a textbook example. If you want to win Survivor and you really don't care that much about anybody else, this is how you do it, because it's the most amazing performance in the history of the show.
This is how you do it.
It really is. I mean, think about like what he had to do. I brought your hat to Julie, and Julie is standing there sobbing. And he is just talking to her like, I didn't want to do this to you. I didn't want to do this to you. And he's just going and going and going and go. And it's like
eyes are rolling out of his face.
Oh, it's like a 5-minute talk. And then he ends it. That's when he ends it with, I brought you your hat. And you're just like, oh my God, like this guy. And then when Sarge comes up and says, I'm not voting for you, I'm voting for Twyla, but are we still going to go have beers? And Chris literally looks him in the eye and is like, I don't care if you vote for me. We're going to have a beer. You can bet on it. And of course, Sarge goes and votes for him because that's what he wanted to hear. But he had to work every member because he had pissed off most of the people on that jury.
Chris was just true to himself, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Chris wasn't out there being fake.
True to himself and true to nobody else, which is what made him so enticing to watch, but also so awful to everybody else.
Yeah, but I mean, and you have to think too, a lot of people will say, you know, there's other good performances, but who Chris was sitting next to was a very, very worthy opponent. And Twyla would be a very good winner of Survivor because she played a very good game. So Chris had to work for this. Like, you know, you go and look and I see in the comments Earl and Cochran and all that, but Cochran was sitting next to Dawn and Sherry. He was going to win that no matter what. Earl was going to beat Dreams and Cassandra no matter what. But Chris coming into that, a lot of people still thought Twyla was going to beat him because Scout was who he should have been sitting next to at the final two.
I feel like Twyla got herself in a similar position, and it's not exactly the same thing, I understand, as Natalie in Winners at War, because it's like, if you just had eliminated this person, you may have won, but you didn't. And so here we sit, and like, why do you deserve it? Why'd you let him get here? Same with Natalie. Like, why'd you let Tony get here? You're like, you had the chance to get rid of him, and you didn't, you know? I know it's not a one-to-one comparison, but feels similar in terms of like how things played out.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about Twyla though is, and what's cool about the season overall is just like, is lying and bullshitting okay? Because Twyla swears on her son, and she gets totally torn apart for it.
Yes,
she was reamed for like 4 straight episodes, just gets completely eviscerated for it. Mm-hmm. And so I think Chris sees that and he's like, oh crap, I have to lean into my lies now.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to how this season was, like how the cast was. This cast was a very like, I don't know if they're Southern, but this is just the generality I'm going to make here. Mm-hmm. It was like a very like Southern minded cast where like those types of, you know, swearing on your son's life, that meant a lot to everybody on this cast. If you would have done that in Amazon, people would have been like, oh, you're annoying, but like they would have gotten over it because I don't think they would have cared as much. But this was a cast that took those things incredibly seriously. And I think, you know, you got to know who you're playing with. And I do think that hurt Twyla. But if you're going to do that kind of thing, and you know you're sitting there with Scout, and you know you're sitting there with, you know, Leanne and Amy and those guys who are going to take that seriously too. I mean, Sarge and Chad very much would take that seriously. Eliza probably wouldn't, but that's, you need to know your audience. And I think that was a big learning lesson for her.
And I think we'll talk about this when we get to Aras's win, but this is not the season that changes swearing on a family member, swearing on a loved one. Shane does that with his son. Tony does that in Cagayan. So it takes a really long time for that to evolve into potentially being an okay thing. And I think even still, for some people, it's not okay.
Phil, I think you said something very crucial where you said you have to know your audience. I think every winner, to an extent, whether they did it really well or just good, understands what the jury wants and how they get the jury's vote, because that's how you win. You have to understand your jury. What does your jury want? And Twyla just failed to understand what they would value at the end.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what do we think Chris's worst move of the season was? We talked a lot. We've been praising him, but what do we think his like worst moment was? Alexa, I know you said you watched it 19 times.
I know. Yeah, that's a tough one. How about making a standing on two legs joke in front of Chad.
That was, oh my gosh, he had a leg up on him. Oh my god,
that was so funny. I mean, Chad's like laughing. Chris, yeah.
That is such an underrated, awkward moment. It's so good.
Yeah. And I think that once again goes back to like, you got to know your audience. He knew that Chad would laugh at that even if he said it. And I forget exactly how that moment went down. I don't know if he like meant it. He didn't realize. Yeah. And I think it's just like funny as anything because they had built a really good relationship. And like, you know, I'm sure that wasn't the first time Chad had ever heard that kind of joke or that kind of statement. So, you know, good on Chris for being able to rebound from it. But we just lost Once Upon an Island. So, Alexa, what else you got about Chris while we wait for Wes to come back?
Well, do you think Chris could win in season 41?
Absolutely. I think Chris's style of gameplay, I personally believe, and I know we always say we don't rank winners, but then sometimes you're forced to rank players for outside purposes. And so you sit down and you rank these players, and Chris is my 4th ranked player. I think Chris is an incredible player, and I think he took a lot of the great things from Survivor and he elevated them. And we see it all the time. It was this scrappy, you're here to play the game. You're not here to make friends, which he did. You're not here though you're worried about your family and you're worried about you. And when the numbers look against you, keep on pushing, because we saw that in some previous seasons for sure. But we also saw a lot of people giving up and being like, you know what, there's nothing I can do. My back's against the wall. I guess I'm going to go home. But Chris really set the stage for, it doesn't matter if you blow the first challenge. It doesn't matter if you have no numbers at the merge. It doesn't matter if you have no numbers at Final 7. It doesn't matter if you're on the wrong side of the numbers the entire game. Just keep playing the game as hard as you can. So I think it absolutely could still work now.
Wes, can a Chris type player win season 41?
I think we've seen Chris type players. I mean, maybe not his personality. I feel like it's a little bit harder to get away with now. It'd have to be adjusted a bit. I have to adjust his personality like a good parent. But his gameplay, how he played and how things panned out and how his strategy definitely could win again. I feel like we've seen it as recent as David versus Goliath in terms of the whole. I mean, Nick did it. It wasn't the same exact version, but it was pretty close.
Yeah, absolutely. Alexa, I'm assuming you agree.
Yeah, I think so. I think, like you said, Wes, I think that personality type won't necessarily win again, because I think it's really hard to BS your way through an entire season. But I think the back against a wall, pitting a majority alliance against each other, I think that actual strategy, I think that can totally win.
Because it really lowers your threat level when you're like, well, I'm the only one left from my original alliance. And everyone's like, yeah, we can deal with you later. I got bigger fish to fry.
Absolutely. Do we have anything else we want to say about Chris, or should we move on to Tom?
No, we can.
Let's move on to a completely opposite type of winner, yet still a very praised winner.
Something very important to notice between Tom and Chris is that, unlike Chris, Tom just can't seem to make a merge. I mean, he's just not good at it. He just can't make a merge.
Back there. Yeah. We should put that in our trivia, Phil.
If only he can make a merge. I love that.
Yeah, he didn't make a merge. Well, you know what, though, Alexa? Otherwise, everybody's going to be really confused. We have to consider it a merge. We can't put that question because people are going to be like, what's going on? But yeah, that is. So Tom, I was just going to say, so Tom won 5 individual meetings. How many individual meetings did Tom?
5. He's tied with like Colby and Terry. Let me double check. He's tied with a few people.
Like Ozzy, Terry, and Mike.
It's Terry, Colby, Ozzy, and Mike, and Brad Culpepper.
Culpepper. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I know, but the difference here is Mike and Brad, they played in seasons where there was a lot longer of individual immunity. There were a lot more opportunities to win this. Whereas in this season, he didn't have as many opportunities. And like you said, there wasn't a merge. They literally just waited until Oolong was decimated. And so what's interesting about Tom's game compared to Chris's game, Chris's is the ultimate underdog story. And then on the heels of that is the most dominant game by a winner ever. And I don't think there's really any arguing that, because he won 17 challenges. 17. That is insane. He won 17 challenges, and he was only able to be voted out. Now, I got to make sure I'm right here. 1, 2, 3 times.
Yeah.
This is like Joe Anglim levels.
only able to be voted out 3 times, and then he ends up winning 6-1. He doesn't win the 7-0, which I get. It is what it is. Like I said, I don't really care too much if you won 7-0. He didn't receive a vote the entire game. So he almost played the perfect game. But if you're looking at who played the perfect games, you had like Jeremy and JT, and Tom's game, I think, is better than all of theirs because he took a tribe. He led a tribe to never lose, gets to the merge, gets rid of all the people who are actually threats to him, convinces poor Ian that he will never have his honor when he goes back to his home, and gets Ian to quit the game so he can win it easy over Katie. Like, it is just domination.
The Ian shaming is so incredibly fascinating because, not to jump 20 minutes from now, but can that ever happen in modern day Survivor? Do you know what would happen to poor Ian Rosenberger if he steps down in 2020 from the final immunity challenge? The poor kid would get absolutely roasted.
I would hope he's not on social media. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's still a time where other people respecting you is very important. And Tom found a way to manipulate that, which is pretty messed up, but totally worked.
Well, yeah, and it was all at that final 4 when it was it Tom and Jen kept voting for Ian, and then Ian and Katie kept voting for Jen. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
And it was like Tom was like, I'm going to teach you a lesson. I'm going to teach you a lesson. And what's interesting,
Katie was harassing him too. He was getting hit by all angles. I'm going to go on mute.
Yeah, go ahead. But I think Tom's win, this is where like the benefit for Chris is that he never played again. I think Tom's win now gets kind of forgotten because we haven't seen him now play in 10 years. He doesn't play on Winners at War, which would have been epic if he could have played on Winners at War. But we see him play on Heroes versus Villains where he doesn't do well. And I don't think that that's so much to do with Tom as I think it is just to do with who was cast on that Heroes tribe. It was all people who had previous relationships, and I'm not saying that's the only reason, but I do think that Tom was at a huge disadvantage there coming into that. Now, granted, did he defend Stephanie for way too long? Yeah, he absolutely did. But I still think that his win, if you're just looking at it, Survivor Palau, and you don't look at his Heroes Villains game, there are arguments to be made that Tom played the best game ever. I really believe that.
And Sandra said that Tom, I think, is her favorite winner, if I'm not misquoting her. I think she said that Tom's her favorite winner out of all of them. So the queen would know.
The queen would know.
And he's such a fascinating, cool winner because Captain America, as we talked about, doesn't win. Captain America never wins. And Tom was like, was he a New York firefighter?
New York firefighter, yeah.
New York firefighter. Amazing in challenges. Very well liked. Catches a shark. Like, kills a bunch of snakes. Everyone loves him. He's like the dad of the group. The dad never wins. The patriarch never, ever wins. And so that was so cool to watch just complete dominance of not just an alliance, but a person.
Yeah, and it's hard to sit and it's hard to watch like this season again because it is the tale of two seasons. You're essentially watching 2 seasons. You could start this season at final 10 or whatever it is when Stephanie and Bobby John make fire against each other, and you could watch the rest of it and you could call that Survivor Palau. But because all you're watching before that is Oolong back to back, and then Willard, who looks so incredibly like the immunity idol. That might be a trivia question, Alexa. Who looks like their immunity idol? Willard. He gets voted out, but everybody knew he was going to get voted out of Karor, like as soon as they had a chance, and it doesn't even matter. But so you're watching pretty much 2 different seasons, so it's hard to really pinpoint like what are Tom's amazing moves. All of it is post-merge. He never had to do anything pre-merge. He literally could have napped for 20 days on this season and still could have won the game because there was just nothing going on. And then, what was it? They pretty much convince Janu to quit after, well, at first he votes off Kobe because Kobe was coming for him. And then they pretty much convince Janu to quit so that Stephanie can stay in the game. And then because he's using Stephanie, and then he gets rid of Stephanie when he doesn't need Stephanie. Like, he makes a lot of really good moves post-merge, but there's really nothing to sit here and be like, wow, this is what Tom did pre-merge, other than just create an amazing tribe.
Exactly. And that, like, you look back and you watch those challenges, and Tom is the star of the show with the challenges, but Ian is unbelievable in challenges. Was he a dolphin trainer? Like, he's something aquatics oriented. He's an incredible swimmer, and he was also like casually 6'3".
He's a dolphin trainer. I'm looking right now.
So freaking tall. So when you put those two together, like even if Tom doesn't do a challenge, they're still going to win the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you think about too, and this is something I'm obviously on the Survivor Wiki right now, as I know you are too, Wes. But when you look at this, Tom won this without. This was the last season without an immunity idol.
Yes.
And you kind of think about what had to go on in this post-merge with Ian, like you were saying, Alexa, like, and Greg, who's a really strong guy. And then you had Kobe, who's a really good strategist, and Stephanie, who was strong and America's sweetheart for 3 months.
Season.
Yeah. When you watch all of this happen, it's really amazing what that tribe and like what he was able to pull off, where he was always on the right side of the numbers every single time. Yeah, he won a lot of immunities, but without playing any idols or finding idols or anything like that, I thought he just did a really great job.
I know you said earlier this season's like a tale of two seasons. Like this season can be split up in half and have two different seasons. I almost feel like, though, also, I know we're talking about Tom mostly here, but Stephanie, of course, is going to come up in our next season we're about to talk about. And she's present here as well, but it's almost like a tale of her. It's almost like what happens with Russell, where if, like, if you watch Samoa and Heroes vs. Villains back to back as Russell's story, it's like it really is like a 2-season story. Same with Stephanie here. Like this is her first season, and then she comes back with a vengeance in Guatemala. So like this season has like almost like two tales, I guess. Like within its own self, it has the two tales, and then it's part one of another tale, a larger tale for Stephanie. I think it's really interesting. Palau has so many layers to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you kind of realize how unlikable Oolong was, because Stephanie was the most likable player on that tribe. And then when Stephanie goes to Guatemala, which we'll talk about in a little bit, like everybody, like, though they like Stephanie, but she's still like the evil version of Stephanie. And it was like Stephanie, I was actually talking to a friend about this the other day. Stephanie's kind of the beginning of like, you have to watch what you say when you go on Survivor, because Stephanie dropped a lot of words.
She dropped some R-bombs.
A lot of R-bombs, a lot of words out there that Stephanie was dropping like crazy after being America's sweetheart. And I mean, we see this all the time. I mean, Heidi says it in her season, and like it's just the changing of the times as we go through 20 years of history. Yes, a lot's going to happen, but it's kind of crazy how like there's so many levels, like you're saying, Wes, to Survivor Palau because of the storyline of Bobby, John, and Stephanie. Really, it was like, who's going to win Oolong, and then who's going to win the game?
You have someone who is hilarious now, but would probably not even get cast in season 41. James Miller, Mr. Not PC right there.
He's and maybe this will cause people might hate me for this. He's one of my favorite forgotten characters in Survivor history. I think he is phenomenal television. I mean, he's an absolute ass, and I mean that in a positive and a negative way. He is amazing. He is great with confessionals, and he's also kind of mean and dumb and and he's so full of himself, but he's great TV. And that's the thing that always leaves a bad taste in my mouth about Palau, is we lost a lot of great characters from Palau because of how much Karor decimated them. Like, let's be honest, we didn't need to watch Karen go as far as she did.
Watch your tongue.
Watch my tongue. I know.
Deal with him, Alexa. Get him.
I am pro Karen. She sucks.
Karen sucks. Katie, Janu, who is the first quitter in Survivor history. We see a lot of these players that wouldn't go very far, while we lose Angie and we lose James and we lose Bobby John, who I don't find to be all that entertaining, but still we're losing those characters. Mm-hmm. You lose a lot of really good Survivor players that we'll never, ever see on our TVs again because of just the oolonging that happened in this game, whatever you would call it. But a lot of that does have to do with the fact that even though the tribe was weaker probably as a whole, they had Tom, Ian, and Greg, and the three of them could do anything they wanted to the people on the other tribe. The other tribe had no shot against those three guys, just absolutely no shot.
Yeah, I got nothing.
Yeah, they most certainly did not. And like you make a good point. Like with Katie, she's I think Katie's entertaining in a kind of like annoying 20-whatever-year-old way. Like there was something kind of relatable about her because she would always get mad at like Tom and Karen or like mom and dad for chastising her. But I really liked Angie, who Phil, you brought up, and she's someone who would have been a really, really cool character, but just goes way too early.
And there's no redeeming it. And now when you really look back at Palau, which is I think a really good season, even though it doesn't do as well on a rewatch because you know what's going to happen and because it is predictable. The post-merge though is phenomenal. When you really look at Palau now, it kind of falls into exactly what happened with Vanuatu and exactly kind of what happened with Guatemala, which we'll talk about, and exactly kind of what happened like with a lot of these mid-season seasons, Cook Islands until Yule came back. But you start to lose your great characters. Like we don't hear about Stephanie and Tom anymore, and we don't hear about nobody's when we're doing a second chance ballot. We're not looking at names like Angie and James and Bobby John anymore. Like those names don't exist in our sphere anymore, which is crazy. Like Ian Rosenberg, not up there anymore. And those are people that, at the time, like this was amazing. Everybody loved these guys. And now it's just kind of gone. So it's, I
feel like it falls into an awkward period because it is a mill season. It's not one of the super popular. I'll always remember the first few seasons, like the first like 3 especially. So like no matter what, we're never going to forget Richard and Tina and Ethan, all the characters are on those seasons. But this follows right in the aftermath of All Stars. And then we don't get another returning season until Micronesia. And we all know how Survivor, for good reason, because the audience that they have is going to pick people for more recent seasons. So like Vanuatu, Guatemala, Palau all kind of get forgotten when it comes to returning seasons, with the exception, of course, of Stephanie immediately the next season and then Tom later on. And just these seasons get forgotten despite having great characters. Like as standalone seasons, they're great.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think, here's a question I have for both of you, but do you think that we would ever see something like we saw at the final 3 here again, in terms of, do you think Jeff would ever vote somebody out without the jury being able to see it like we did at this?
No, I don't think so.
I think it depends on the situation. I mean, the only other one I can think of immediately is Brandon Hance, but that was
everyone was present. Everyone was present.
Yeah, and that was a very specific situation.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we'd never get to that point because now we have a Final 4, and it's just.
Well, even if it was Final 4, I don't.
Yeah, Final 4, Final 5. I get what you're saying, Phil. Yeah.
But I don't know. I think it'd have to be a certain situation, but I think that would happen. I don't think Jeff has a problem with that.
I think they purposely make their endurance challenges. By the way, this is one thing I do not like about current Survivor is that they do so many endurance challenges, but they're not like the same level of gravitas as you get like here, especially with the final 3. And it's not just the length; it's just like what's at stake. I feel like Winners at War should have had like a hand on heart idol for that returning challenge for the second returning challenge, not for the first one, because it really should be about sheer amount of will. How much do you want this? How much do you want to win this? Because that's really what it should come down to. So if I had to change Winners of War, it'd be the one thing I would change. But I feel like here they like have like this buoy challenge, and I remember reading, or maybe I heard through Tom through an interview, he's like Jeff and them thought this thing was gonna be over like 2 or 3 hours. And then they're getting to sunset time, and Tom's like, Jeff, you guys better get the camera crew ready for nighttime because we're not getting off here anytime soon. And Jeff didn't believe him. And then I think Tom said about 30 minutes later, everyone's coming out there with all the nighttime lights and putting stuff out, putting fire out in the water so they could see them and stuff. So I feel like but now Survivor purposely makes their endurance challenges not have the gravitas and also don't last as long. So I'm not sure if we would ever get to a point where challenges went too long, so they're just doing tribal at the challenge.
Yeah, and so we saw too that interview I actually know you're talking about. That was with Jeff. That was an interview with Jeff because Jeff says that when he brought out the fire, Tom said it's blown in my face. This isn't fair. Ian's not having it blow in his face, and this wasn't here before. It's not my fault that you guys weren't prepared for this. And so Jeff said, you're right. And they had to remove the fire because it was causing an unfair advantage for Ian, and it was just bad. But I agree with you. I wish they would go back to some of these more like endurance, how bad do you want it challenges? Because to me, I'd rather watch Tom versus Ian in that situation than watch people put a ball in, grab a ball, put a ball in, grab a ball. That's just my personal opinion. I know a lot of people will find the other thing to be more exciting, but I always find something like, how far can you push your body? Like, how far can you do it? And I miss the challenges that would take 8-9 hours.
Yes.
And I think that challenge was not going to end if that didn't happen. I don't think that challenge is going to end.
And I'm fine with that. I really think we should go back to, and now I understand it wouldn't be Final 4 anymore because of fire making. Final 5 then should be the how bad do you want it? How bad do you want to get to the end? because if you really want it, you're going to commit and you're going to win this thing. You know, if you're going to stand on that stupid pole and put your hand on the idol for 12 hours, if you really want to win this thing, I think just shows like what kind of person you are too. And then of course, though, you get in seasons where it doesn't last that long because people will cut deals. You know, Vesepia cut a deal with Nalia in season 4, doing that challenge only lasts like 3 or 4 hours. Could have gone longer, I'm sure. But, you know, I think it brings out interesting social dynamics too when people don't want to go 12 hours. They'll figure out how to get off there. You know, they'll figure it out. But I think when you make a challenge so easy that it becomes a whole different thing that we don't really get in Survivor anymore. It brings out a lot of in people and in players. So
absolutely. And I look back on like Survivor Africa when you have T-Bird standing there with her arm up that entire time, and it's like,
singing,
Clarence, what do you want to do? What do you want to do, Clarence? Like, this is up to you.
Tomorrow. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, she's screaming it, and everybody's like, I can't do this. It's worse than Richard Hatch doing the 99 bottles of beer on the wall. But I do wish that they would do some of these again, because like people still talk about Baba Booey. People still talk about that in the Survivor community. I couldn't tell you the final 4 immunity challenge from season 37, from season 33. From season 33, I could, because it was David and Adam, but from season 26, like when you start saying random ones, but if you say, what was the final 3 challenge of Palau, you remember it. When you say, what was the final 3 challenge of Thailand, you remember it because it was a stupid, uncomfortable thing. When you say, like, what was your final 3 challenge of the first 4 seasons, you remember them and you remember the deals that were cut and all of that. And even earlier in the seasons, like I miss the ones where they just stand on a pole and get tempted down with food. Do it.
I mean, that's how we got people stripping naked.
That is after watching Amazon. And Jeff didn't even say, here comes the temptations.
No.
Jenna literally just says, I'm getting naked. Here come, I want my chocolate and peanut butter.
Jeff's like, where can I get some chocolate?
Yeah, I know. He literally like had to call it. Guys, we're going to have to do this challenge in an hour when we get the chocolate and peanut butter here. So everybody just take a seat.
So according to Rob Sesternino, I know we're talking about random, we're talking about Palau, but Rob said that unlike in the show where it like showed him immediately having it, he said actually they were like scrambling really fast. It took them like 20 minutes to get that chocolate peanut butter. I thought that was a fun fact.
So funny. So what do we, so like when I look at Tom then too, he moves on, he plays in Heroes Villains. I said this already. He didn't really play well in Heroes Villains. He did find an idol. It was more that he was just always on the outside looking in because he sided with Stephanie at the beginning, and that was just never going to work. Do we though think that a player like Tom could win again?
Definitely not.
Player like Tom. Do you mean his personality or his gameplay?
Just or both. I mean, talk on both points. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's so much harder now to do the same gameplay because, as we joked, but there was no merge because, you know, Kuror just dominated. But Kuror dominated, and there was not a tribe swap. There wasn't a second tribe swap, which Survivor is so prone to do, which I dislike greatly. One tribe swap's enough. But anyway, so nowadays, Survivor, I don't think Survivor's let them go without a tribe swap since like South Pacific. So I don't think it's possible to do the same exact thing because of the tribe swap. I do think it's possible though, like Joe Anglim, to get all the way to the merge without going to tribal. But I don't know. I mean, it's I think Tom had some good social gameplay in there that would carry over. I think the dominating of challenges is possible. As I mentioned with Joe Anglim, who did dominate. It's just that Joe Anglim, by the time he was dominating all the pre-merge stuff, he had played the 3rd time, and everyone already knew how good he was in individual immunity challenges. But I think it's possible he could win. I just don't think the likelihood is high. But I don't see Tom as like a one-off. Like it could happen again.
Well, like you said, definitely not.
I'm saying definitely not, because I think what helped him win in his firsts in Palau is that he was the leader. He was such an obvious leader. And Kobe, like the way that he and Kobe interacted, there would be 6 more Kobes on a current type of season. Playing would never let the leader get that far away. He's an NYPD firefighter. He's amazing at challenges. He's so likable. He's such a provider. You get rid of 3 of his best qualities, and he's still such an obvious leader. And the leader doesn't, other than Tony, the leader doesn't really win anymore.
Well, I was just going to say, too, I've always been defensive of the Toms, Gary Hogabooms, Brendan Shapiro's, who really, I mean, Brendan Shapiro's the very handsome version of that. He's the very young version of that, if that makes sense. Even though they're all the same age, he's not the gray haired, the Silver Fox. Yeah. But I always love that character, but I do think that part of the reason we don't see it as much anymore is because Tom Westman ruined it for everyone, because he really was so dominant that now anytime somebody comes out and is like, I work as a New York police officer, or I work as a New York firefighter. I mean, maybe it wouldn't have the same effect in 2020 because we're far removed from 9/11. We're living in this world right now. We're seeing protests and things. So maybe it wouldn't have the same effect. But still, there's a level of respect that most probably people are going to feel with that. And that's automatically going to put a huge target on your back. I mean, Ken Stafford gets a round of applause because he says he's a firefighter. He's a police officer. He's getting a round of applause for it. This is day one of Survivor, and he's immediately getting a round of applause. He's immediately everybody's favorite out there. Mm-hmm. And Tom kind of had the same thing. So I think it's hard to get that loud, outspoken man who is your Terry Dietz, Tom Westman, Andrew Savage, who wants to be in control and needs to be in control and does everything they can to be in control and pisses off a lot of people along the way, because we're all adults. Nobody wants to be told what to do by, somebody that age all the time, but pisses off a lot of people, but still would have gotten the respect to win the game had they made it to the end or did get the respect. I just think it's really hard to pull off.
I think okay, so it kind of, in a way, in Redemption Island, this game style works again in terms of being the leader and controlling everyone being loyal to you. I know Rob is a different person than Tom and is revered totally different than Tom, but in a way it did work. I know it's not Modern Survivor, but I feel and track me here, that for the longest time it was being an under the radar player is the way to go. Lower your threat level. And we just had Tony win by lowering his threat level so much that now that's I feel after Winners at War, it's now going to be this is the premier strategy that everyone's going to try to copy. Lower your threat level so much that people don't. I feel that, but then the reverse is going to happen. It's going to get to a point where it's now I'm aiming for people who have lowered their threat level so much. So eventually we could get someone who is just loud and proud and be whatever, that guy, easy beat at the end. He thinks he's the leader, and maybe he actually is. Maybe he really is the leader. I feel we could get to a point where it just the tide shift. We shift from targeting all these bigger people. In Edge of Extinction, they were calling them pilots, and Tony proved that actually being a passenger is really the way to go. And I feel eventually the pendulum could swing and someone like Tom could win again. I don't know if in 41 it could happen. Well, I'd be very curious. I mean, if they get teenagers on, maybe.
Yeah.
Great point.
Yeah. All right. Well, do we have anything that stands out as a bad move from Tom? Because I know we've praised him. What do we have a bad move from Tom on this season?
He didn't win all 8 individual meetings.
Yeah, he should have won 6, so we couldn't have this 5-way tie.
I know.
Yeah, I can't even say managing his threat level, because the only person who tried to fight him was Kobe, and I saw how that worked out. So I don't know if he really did anything wrong.
Yeah, I don't think he did. And that's why I think I think Jeff had said before Heroes versus Villains that Tom had played the best game ever. And this is why I always have a hard time when people are like, well, Parvati and Rob are the best players ever. They're great and they played great. But when you look, we'll get to their wins later. But when you look at what Tom did and Chris did on their first seasons, these I think are this is what playing Survivor is like. It was your first time out there. You went out there against all newbies, and you pulled off what you need to pull off to perfection, whether it was the underdog story or the domination story. And now we're going to move on to the what the hell just happened story, which is Danni Boatwright winning Survivor Guatemala in what, if she wasn't on Winners at War, you could probably sit people down to watch this season every time.
Oh my God.
And not one time would somebody say Danny's going to win this season at final 4. At final 5, it doesn't matter where it is. Maybe at final 3, you would say she has a chance. But how does Danni pull this off?
Yeah, I think the number one thing we have to mention, and that everyone already knows about, is that Danni kept her gameplay so secret that even production didn't know. I think that's if that's true or not. It does seem clear by the edit of the show that she just kept what she was doing to herself, so much so. Maybe, I don't know why, I haven't listened to any Danni reviews, but maybe it was with the assumption that if she tells production things, that They might ask questions of other survivors that would lead them to think about things that Danny's doing, which I think is a very legitimate thing to think. So I don't know if that's true, but I feel like this is the first person ever to literally hide their game. And I can't name another survivor who just hid their game. I mean, Natalie White was hid in, but I don't know if she hid her game.
I don't think she tried to. I think that was not her decision.
No.
Yeah, I mean, when at least when I think about Danny, to me, like the moment that stands out about her is her birthday party, not like
30,
a particular move. And I legitimately like, you know, we're arguing in 2020 about did Sarah give up her Chinese food because she's an amazing person or because she's playing a strategic game? Danny actually just wanted to celebrate her birthday, and you like the tribe comes over and half of them are having a great time and the other half are like, man, we can't be interacting with other people. Yeah. That's the thing I think about when I think about Danny. Everything else was so subtle, and she gets an advantage in one of the later challenges that she uses well. But in terms of like moments, that's what I think about.
Yeah, and it's hard to pinpoint Danny because she plays a very similar game to that Chris Doherty plays in terms of post-merge, because she's always on the wrong side of the numbers. She's the last one standing from her alliance. I think it might even be at final 7. Is it final 7? Gary goes home at 7. So I guess it's at final 6 when things, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so it's at final 6 when Danny's the last one standing from her alliance. And so she has to overcome all that. She has to overcome Judd and Lydia and Cindy and Rafe, who was playing a very good game, and Stephanie, and how everybody was just idolizing Stephanie. She was so great. And, you know, obviously, you know, everybody started to realize that she was no better than any of them. She was just another person who played Survivor. But like, it's really impressive what Danny was able to pull off. It's just really hard to see. And she's one. It's such a shame because we were all so excited to watch Danny play again in Winners at War. And because of how her game went, I feel like she's going to get like no respect as time continues to move forward, which is a bummer because what she did in Guatemala, a tough season to win. First of all, she lost 30 pounds on Survivor Guatemala.
And she weighed nothing to begin with. Yeah.
Danny Boatwright lost 30 pounds. That had to have been a quarter of her weight. I mean, that's unbelievable. And she's out there and she's competing against everybody, and she ends up winning in a 6-1 vote over who was just America's sweet. That's just unbelievable. So that's like a lot of what I have to say about Danny, but we got to like break it down, obviously, a little bit less broad than what I just did.
She also, she has an interesting move when she outs Gary as being a professional football player. And the way she does it is in the middle of a challenge. She hasn't actually met him yet. Like that's how knowledgeable she is. And I think he must have played for a team that plays in Kansas City a lot because she had recognized him.
He played for the Cowboys, but she just recognized him because she was a
massive sports fan.
She married a Kansas City Chief, by the way. I don't know if you guys knew that.
That's commitment to the city. I absolutely
exactly.
But she does that in the middle of a challenge, and no one really picks up on it. No one really says anything, but Gary's totally freaking out. And then they end up aligning. So it's not like, you know, Gary doesn't like threaten to get rid of her. And she doesn't really say anything past that. She just like planted the seed and then walked away. And all of a sudden it became this conversation, but it never ended up getting back to her, which is super impressive.
Yeah. And Gary was the first time too that we really saw somebody have to come out there and hide who they were. And we'd seen people hide who they were before this. Brian Heidick didn't tell anybody how rich he was, and we talked about him in our last one. But with Gary, he had to come out and be Gary Hawkins. He was a landscaper, and that was it. That was all he was. And he couldn't say that he was Gary Hogeboom when he played, and it was pissing people off. I mean, Amy says she'll kill him. If she finds out, she's going to kill him. And
Gary beat you like a stepchild, which is another sentence that's not going to get said in 2020.
Not okay anymore. But
yeah,
but it's amazing. I mean, it's
she's so good.
She's so good. So Amy says that about Gary, but Danny kind of like had to keep this to herself, and it actually helped her to build an alliance because Danny kind of struggled early to build an alliance. We didn't really see her get in super close with anybody, and we don't really see her get super close with anybody throughout the season, but she was able to kind of what's interesting is a lot of people would make the mistake, oh, I know who you are, and that's it. I'm going to blow up your game. But she used it to build trust with him and be like, I'll never tell anybody. And if I don't tell anybody, then we should work together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think it's super important, and we mentioned Gary, so we might as well mention the introduction to Hidden Immunity Idol, which will now be prevalent throughout the rest of Survivor. Danny's the first winner to have to, and I know it didn't really make a difference this season, the first winner to have to deal with somebody playing a Hidden Immunity Idol, and then, of course, the first winner to have to deal with 2 returnees. Like, no other newbie has ever had to deal with returnees, and she did it, and she beat one at the end. Just things that she did that kind of like Vecepia, like on paper, like that's impressive, but then you watch it and you're like, not as impressed as you should be because of, I don't know, just how things are shown on the show.
Yeah, it's not exciting. And at the end of the day, Survivor doesn't want Danny to beat Stephanie. They want Stephanie to win this game.
Stephanie,
yeah. This is the first example of the captain season. And I mean, we'll talk about Sophie. We'll talk about this consistently. The captains are the ones who get all the screen time.
Yep.
And one time on a captain season, a returning player has won, and that was Boston Rob. Every other time there's been a captain season, it's been somebody who sat next to one of the captains in final and beats them. And it really helps that Boston Rob was also on, don't even get me started, but he sits there with Philip and Natalie. Obviously, neither one of them are going to get votes, but
we'll get there, Phil.
Danny kind of used this to her advantage, where it was like, I can see that Stephanie is pissing people off. So I'm just going to keep going. Like, I'm going to use Stephanie, and I want to sit next to Stephanie. And she makes that great deal with Rafe. And then Rafe says, you don't have to go through with it. And she's like, all right, cool, whatever. Bye. See ya. That you're an idiot. Why would you say this to me? But see you later, Rafe.
Then Rafe doesn't end up voting for Danny in the end, right?
Let me check that. No, Rafe is the only one who votes for. He's the only one who votes for Stephanie at the final trial.
Yeah. So, but I mean, lucky for Danny, that didn't even remotely matter.
Yeah.
What's crazy though is like, okay, so I think something we haven't really mentioned, but like the amount of confessionals you get really that can affect your screen time. Like, I'm going to briefly run through confessionals for the first 11 seasons because Danny seems so invisible, but she's not the winner with the least amount of confessionals. Surprisingly, Richard had 92. Tina had 69.
92.
Yeah, Rich. Well, there was a lot of talking that first season because, Kelly got 85, but I wouldn't think of Kelly as a great narrator. Sue got 71. Rudy got 51. There's a lot of confessionals that season. Tina got 69. Ethan got 65. Vecepia had 38. Kathy had 77 that season. She had the most. Thailand, Brian had 53, which is, by the way, 6 less than Clay. The Amazon, Jenna got 57, whereas Rob Cesternino got 94. Pearl Island, Sandra got 54. All Stars, Amber got 43. Vanuatu, Chris got 71. Palau, Tom only got 59, despite being such a prevalent figure in the season.
Because he didn't lose the whole pre-merge, so that's going to really screw your screen time.
Much. Well, also, I noticed there's a very big consistent or trend of in the finale, the winner gets like double-digit confessionals. Tom only got 8 in the finale, whereas like Chris got 15, Amber got 10.
How many did Danny get in her season after 11?
That was next. Danny gets, and I think it's important because we're talking about how Stephanie overshadowed Danny. Stephanie in her first season in Palau got 60. However, even though lasting like 3 or 4 more episodes, Stephanie only got 62 in Guatemala and Danny got 41. So Stephanie only got 2 more confessionals in the season she lasts all season.
And I have something to say about that, though, and I think it's because Stephanie didn't go to every tribal council in this season. That's going to obviously have a big impact on it. Whereas in Palau, and this is why Tom doesn't get as many, is because every time that a challenge ends, they only go to the tribe that lost. So you're constantly, Karor is not in 20 minutes of every single episode in the pre-merge, which is a lot. So Tom's not going to get the confessionals there. And the same thing with Stephanie. She might have only been in 11 episodes or 10 episodes or whatever it is. And then she's in all 13 or 14 later, but she's not, her tribe's winning. So she's not getting as much screen time.
And she got 12 confessionals in episode 8, the one where the Oolong finally fell apart. Which I don't think anyone in episode 8 or pre-merge or whatever has gotten double digits.
Yeah.
Not even Tony in Winners at War. So
and then Danny, I mean, Survivor has changed so much. I mean, we see earlier seasons just had more confessionals to give, which is why looking at confessional counts as we move further away from the first season gets more and more difficult because there's not as much opportunity for confessionals in Survivor season 40 as there were in Survivor season 1, where they were literally doing nothing except being like, I'm knitting. And you're like, wow, we're watching somebody knit now. This is great. But Danni only getting 41, I'm not surprised by that, but that's still a very low number. And a lot of that also has to do with the fact she was on some winning tribes. And I know she obviously lost a lot. I mean, she lost, 3 in a row right before the merge. Yeah. And then obviously once the merge hits, you're going to be very much like a big part of the season if you're the winner, or you should be. Yeah. But so for Danni, winning, it looks like I'm looking at it right now. She won 3 tribal immunities. Probably not getting much screen time there because you have Judd and you have Gary and you have Amy and you have Brian and you have Stephanie and you have Bobby John and you have Rafe. Really good characters. Really, Margaret, phenomenal character. Phenomenal. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just think we were talking about how Stephanie overshadows Danni, which is totally true. Because Danni gets less confessionals than Amber.
Yeah.
And Danni's not in love with anyone, as you may not know, in Guatemala. So there's not even a real reason why Danni's getting buried. So, yeah.
Well, so you're telling me that the guy she married who was on the Chiefs wasn't also on Guatemala?
No, it wasn't John.
It wasn't Jamie. Jamie wasn't like a center for the Chiefs,
I hope you get bit by a freaking crocodile, man.
No, man, I'll tell you. I just think with the especially what Danni she had to deal with, like, as we're talking about it, and it's fun, but she had to deal with crazy people. I mean, she started off on that tribe with Margaret and Judd, and they hated each other the entire time. She had Blake, she had Amy, she had, and then post-merge, you have Jamie and Bobby John who are going to, like, bite each other's ears off. You have...
In, like, a weirdly... like erotic way, but also because they hate each other.
Very strange. You had Judd, you had Cindy, you had Rafe, you had Lydia, very strong personalities. And she did a really good job of not being a strong, like, she never left who she was in order to win this season. I think on Winners at War, she kind of started to deviate from who she was.
And you're going to hear me say this exact same thing in like 10 or 15 minutes, but I think the way that she won and the way that Aras won were very similar. One was just in the majority alliance and one wasn't. It was just managing your people. She knew that how people were perceiving Stephanie. And I think that's how she ended up winning. It wasn't one big move. It was just, okay, here's this majority alliance. I'm just going to act as if I'm not here. And they're all a bunch of egos, Judd and Stephanie, they're going to freak out at each other.
Oh, I think you're 100% right. It kind of goes back to Chris and Tom played very similar games, just in different ways. One dominated and the other one was under the radar, but they played them perfectly. And then we see Aras and Danni. One has nobody, the other has everybody. And it's about managing. How do you keep the Kasaya 6 in order? Yeah. While Danny's like, how do I keep these 5 from starting to like each other? Like, I need them to just despise each other this entire game, and I'm just going to sit here and be like, haha, you guys all hate each other. Isn't this fun?
I don't know. I think it's something that Danni does, and I wish she would explain more, but she doesn't. She's hiding it. She's very good at hiding.
Yeah, absolutely. She really is. So what do we think, though, on when we talk about somebody like Danni? We know we just watched her on Guatemala, and again, we just watched her on Winners at War. Yeah. And again, I think that she played outside of herself. I think she was paranoid. I think she was worried. I think she was scared. She hadn't played in however many years. I think the game was moving too fast for her. She tried to do what she had to do, but whatever.
She's not well connected as well, I think.
Either. Yeah. Agreed. But do we think that somebody like Danni can still win?
I think so.
Yeah, I don't. So we say I think so. I think what's the most recent example of a Danni winning Survivor?
Michelle.
I think Michelle.
Yeah.
But so a couple things have changed since Michelle that we all know about. Of course, the Final Four fire making, which I don't think, by the way, changes whether a Danni could win, but it is a difference in terms of how you get to the end. But I think the biggest one is I feel like since Ko-Rong, there's been a huge shift towards, I think it was Millennials vs. Gen X was maybe the first time it was mentioned, or at least it was talked about more, was having a resume, having moves, having things that you've done. If Danni's hiding everything from everybody, and nobody knows what she did, I feel like that would be a huge detriment if Danny of Guatemala got to the end in season 40, season 41, you know?
So I agree with that, but then we did have Tommy win, who, Tommy, I hope you're not listening, like, by modern Survivor standards, didn't do anything. But obviously,
I get
obviously, so like it's more focusing if she could really sell it as I won via my social game by doing XYZ. I think that's how she has to win.
Sure. Yeah. And also the final tribal format was the other thing I was going to mention. That changes how it's like a conversation. I know a lot of people aren't for that. I do like it. I also do miss the individual questions. So if they were to do either one, I would be okay. But I think
go ahead. No, finish your thought.
I was just gonna say, I know a lot of people have mentioned how it would be harder for a Michelle to win nowadays because of fire making and because of the new tribal format and how they implemented these changes in response to her winning. Because I think it was almost like was it the next season? Was it 33 where they started?
No, it's 35.
34.
34 is where they started the discussion, and 35 is where the fire making.
Yeah.
Good.
I think with you make a really good point with the new discussion format because early, like from an entertainment standpoint, like obviously the early ones are great because everyone just like rips each other apart. Yes. But I think if you're a player like Danny or I can't think of anyone else off the top of my head right now, like people come up to Stephanie and they trash her. But that doesn't really happen in the new discussions. It's more like the third person just gets brushed away.
I think the reason for that actually is because the third person who is getting trashed, we already know as an audience can't win. So they're ignoring it on purpose. I still think it's happening. But like back when there were final twos, you had to show how bad the other person was. So it made sense that the other person won. I mean, that was kind of like with Matt Van Ertvelda versus Jenna. They're really showing Matt's like ineptitude at that final tribal, whereas they're showing Jenna do really well. But if that was a final three, they probably would have just ignored Matt. And I think that's what we see now. Like while somebody like Michelle, it doesn't seem like she was getting ripped apart. She could have been getting ripped apart in that tribal. We just didn't know it. And the same thing with Nora, and the same thing with Julie. Those people could be getting ripped apart. We're just not really seeing it because we already know as an audience that person has no chance of winning.
I do think that the new the final tribal format, I don't want to get too caught up, by the way, talking Modern Survivor, we're talking Guatemala, but I do think one of the things is that it seems like the juries are now more respectful than they were when they were like individually going up there and asking questions, very pointed, very like, why did you do this? Or why do you keep saying honesty when you lied to everybody? Like, bro, bro, I
think it's because people don't, I'm saying this in a nice way, people don't really care about the respect part anymore. It's not like, you lied about your wife. Like, I would never vote for you now. People don't think like that anymore.
And I think that too, like, let's be real. Those early ones, you have a couple good moments, Sue Hawk, and you get like a couple. It's kind of boring because if you don't care about the person who's walking up there to ask the question, you're just like, oh my God, they're talking. Who cares? Like, I don't want to watch it. And I do think that this is a better format. I know a lot of people will be like, well, it goes against the integrity, and everybody's talking at Ponderosa anyway. So I don't think it makes a difference. Like, just have the conversation. But I do think that somebody like Danny still could win because Sarah Lucina, I believe, said it on our podcast. Maybe she said it after, but she saw a future where if she goes to final three with Natalie and Michelle could have won that. And I think that that's like being missed because Michelle got 0 votes, but a lot of people who voted for Tony would have voted for Michelle over Natalie, which is something we found out still with that format. And so I think that somebody who plays a similar game to Danny, you still can win, but it's a lot harder to do it now than it was back then. And also it really helps to sit next to somebody who disappoints and does not live up to the hype. Everybody thought Stephanie was going to be their best friend. Everybody wanted to hang out with Stephanie. Everybody wanted to be Stephanie. And then it turns out that Stephanie is kind of just like every other one of us. She's flawed. She's competitive. She can be mean. She can be nice. She's whatever. She's New Jersey at the end of the day. And so she acts like that. And everybody was so disappointed in her that if they had just met Stephanie for the first time, they probably would have still given her votes because they wouldn't have had these expectations. You never meet your heroes, kids. And they met their hero and they hated their freaking hero.
Yeah. Well, to circle back to Guatemala, my point is, like, would Danny survive in a new final tribal format? Because her strategy, as we've mentioned, is like hiding everything from everybody. So, like, is it too late in the final tribal to be mentioning, here's everything I did, when everybody has like almost no time to process what you've done. So I don't know. What could Danny win today? I think she have to be more open, frankly, because her biggest strategy is hiding things.
Yeah, you could be. I think you're onto something there, because I mean, we hear a lot. It's not to always relate this back to Winners at War, but when Natalie dropped that she was sending stuff from the edge, that was the first time everyone was hearing about it, and I think that put a lot of people off. Well, so that's obviously a very different situation, other than just like, here's my strategy, because obviously you're not going to talk about that until the end, but definitely something to think about.
Because I mean, like when Ethan in your tell-all with Ethan said that, like I was laughing when I told Natalie, I'm like, hey, people think we're saying it. Ethan's hilarious, but definitely, I feel like you almost have to like drop hints along the way of like what your strategy is, but like not enough to blow yourself up, because people, I think, do need to know ahead of time, like, what are you doing? So it's almost like they can get like a keen eye and like, oh, I see what they're doing. Okay, now things are clicking. But if you wait too long. And so I wonder if current Danny could get to the end, would she have dropped hints? Would she what? Because we only saw her get like 2 episodes in Winners of War.
Yeah,
I don't know. I really don't know what Danny would have done in the merge if she was on her path to get to the final 3.
But it did seem like she was trying to play harder or more obvious than what she did in her first season, because a lot of what got her into trouble was being like, no, I'm not going to do that. Yes, I'm going to do this. But like, she was being more revealing just in those first 2 episodes than she ever was in all of Survivor Guatemala, I think.
And they may have done that on purpose in response to everyone saying about Guatemala.
Yeah,
could have, but I don't know. I mean, it's hard to really say, but they absolutely could have. What do we think was Danny's worst move on this season? Does anybody got one?
Worst move? I'll let you guys go.
I was gonna really let you guys take the wheel on that.
Man.
I guess this is good that like none of these winners have blatantly bad moves. I think as we get to newer seasons, maybe we'll have better examples.
Her biggest moment was winning immunity, I think, at Final 5 or Final 6. I'm sorry, when Judd goes home, because I think she still probably survives that, but she forced their hand. She really did. And then after that happened, they all just ate each other after that. They all hated Cindy because she didn't give up the car. They all hated Lydia just because she was doing the pancake dance. Rafe and her actually they should have been the final 2. It should have been her and Rafe. Like, that should have been it. So I really do think her biggest move was winning that immunity, which always is tricky because people always be like, we don't really like, people who have to win immunities in order to stay in the game. It's part of the game. You stay 3 more days. I have no problem with it. Immunity runs are part of the game. You can do it. You can do it. Good on you. I don't care. But I do think like somebody like Danny, that move, even though it's not really a move, she made sure she was the last person standing from her alliance. Gary goes home. She even votes for Gary to kind of show like, guys, I'm with you. See, haha. And then she turns around and she wins immunity, which forces that final 5 to eat each other. And they ate each other. And that was the end of all of them. They did not like each other again after that.
Mm-hmm.
She was on the wrong side of the vote when it came to Brandon and Bobby John. She was, that's not an individual move, but she entered the merge and was voting correctly back-to-back times before eventually she got on board and was voting with the majority the rest of the way. Not that that's an individual move, but she's not like she played a flawless game either.
No, she absolutely didn't. And I actually was going to say, I think that, some of her early merge management is probably the worst part of her game. I mean, I always feel bad for Brandon. Brandon was a really great guy and really only went home because Stephanie felt bad for Bobby John, which like, I think it would have been better if Bobby John just didn't make the merge again. So like but like Brandon actually wasn't a bad player and Danny was still kind of being loyal there, but she was still doing enough to not be seen as a threat, which is ultimately what helps her win the game.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We can move on. Let's move on to Aras.
Let's do that.
Let's move on to
Aras Baskauskas.
Thank you, Alexa.
So
we're talking about I think this was the youngest male winner at the time. I think Fabio came along and broke the record, but he was the youngest male winner at the time. And he wins. I always say Aras is a disappointing winner, and I'll let both of you talk. Don't worry. But I always say he's a disappointing winner. And Alexa and we did our Guatemala rewatch. We did our Panama rewatch as parts of our podcast here. If you want to watch those, go watch them. They're fun. But with Panama, I always find it to be disappointing because I love Terry. I love Terry. I think Terry's great. I think Terry winning would have been just an epic storyline. You never want your storyline to hit a wall. You want your Captain America hero to win. You want them to pull it out at the end, and he didn't pull it out. So I always found Aras to be disappointing. But once you get over that, once you get over the fact that Dan Fuego could not do a 6-piece puzzle, and that Terry had to win every immunity challenge and pretty much did, and then just couldn't at Final 3 because it was a balance thing, and he was like 50 years old with his knobbly knees. You really have to respect what Aras was able to do by managing. I mean, we were just talking about Danny not managing the crazies. Aras had to manage the craziest group of 6 people that has ever aligned with each other in Survivor.
For a while, too. Like, for most of the game. Yeah. I mean, Phil and I have talked ad nauseum about Terry versus Aras, and we stand on very different sides of that coin. I never viewed Terry as Captain America because I found him in that season to be very demeaning, and we'll get to that. But to me, the arc, like the perfect arc, almost would have been Sari, because she has the whole like I'm so afraid to leave thing, and then she goes home the way she does. But I think you're right, Phil. Like Aras feels like the quietest person. Doesn't feel like is the quietest personality of the final 8. So
after Sally goes, I mean, pretty much after Nick goes home.
Yeah.
At the merge, and then it's Austin. Even Austin and Sally like have bigger personalities than Aras.
Yeah. So then when Aras wins, you're like, okay, the normal person won, which is I guess what you want when you could have had like Shane or Courtney or Danielle get there. But I think he kind of encapsulates like that entire season, that when you have so many crazy personalities, the like quasi-rational person who's 24,
Something like that, yeah.
Ends up taking it home.
I think we keep mentioning in every season how like people had to handle different things in previous seasons. Not really in Vanuatu. Well, not really in Vanuatu. The men versus women split had happened before, but in Palau, there's no tribe merge. It's a tribe absorption. And then in Guatemala, how having returning players come into the game for the first time against newbies. This season, even though it doesn't happen for very long, they start with 4 tribes, which I think was new and interesting. But what's even more interesting is that after All-Stars introduced us to 18 castaways in one season. They continued that in Vanuatu with 18. Palau, there was 20, but really it was 18 after they got rid of Wanda. And then in Panama, in Guatemala was also 18. But Panama, they go back to 16, but then they decided to split 16 between 4 tribes, which I thought was a really weird decision.
Yeah.
First time any winners had to deal with 4 tribes starting out, until we get to Cook Islands next. But Aras is the first one to have to handle that, even though it didn't last very long.
Yeah, and that's not an easy thing to handle at all. I mean, what's so bizarre about that, and what I hated so much about that, is it made sense when they then came out the next time and they did, okay, we're going to do 5 tribes or 4 tribes of 5.
4 tribes.
That works. That totally works in Cook Islands. But like, you set this up as old men versus young men versus old women versus young women. Who are at the disadvantages here?
And Serene's like, I'm not old.
And Melinda's like 32.
Yeah, Melinda's in her 30s. Sari was in her 30s, maybe
Jeff's
40.
Old then.
Yeah, Jeff was older than almost every single person on that cast.
Yeah.
Seriously. So who's at the disadvantage here? The older men and the older women. No doubt about it. And you're only giving them 4 people. There's nowhere to hide. There's nothing to do. Like, that is torture. And obviously it only lasts 1 vote.
Which is so lame, by the way.
Which is so stupid. Why even start it that way?
Yeah.
You vote out 1 person. Alexa, who was it that they voted out here?
Tina Shear.
Was that who it was?
Timbertina, my favorite player of all time.
Okay, so it was Timbertina.
Don't at me.
And then like what we see is like Sari is the only one from that old women tribe to make it into the merge, and that's why her storyline is always so epic. It's because like she got up off the couch and she did it, and you can't beat them with these, but you can beat them with these, and all of these great moments. But it also helps that she was on the stupidest starting tribe ever, and I'm not saying that the women were stupid. I'm saying that tribe should have never existed. Yeah. That should have never existed. And so like when you look at Aras right at the beginning of the game, Aras gets to come out and be on the odds-on favorite. And I understand that in Amazon and Vanuatu, the men lost first. Mm-hmm. And it was in one of those seasons because of the young men, and the other season it was because of the old men. But at the end of the day, like, you can't come in and, like, odds are just saying that. I look at it as a gender thing would be 50-50. It may be 55-45, but it's not 100% to 0. The women are going to win every single time. Mm-hmm. So you have Aras, who comes out with Austin, Nick, himself, and why am I completely drawing a blank? And Bob Dog.
Yeah.
How are they ever going to lose? Like, they were never going to lose. So I just find it amazing that, like, Aras started that way on this season, where then you had Sari, who's literally there with Melinda, Ruth Marie, and Tina. Mm-hmm. And it's like, now go build your shelter and then get ready to do your challenge against those hunks over there. Good luck.
I mean, and you see it with the challenge. I forget which challenge it is, but where you have to wrestle each other for a bag. And Ruth Marie literally loses because Bob Dog just has to hold her shirt and touch his own mat. It's ridiculous.
It's literally the best.
Yeah. I really wish they had 20 people in the season with 4 tribes. And then even in Cook Islands, I don't like how they, after only 2 episodes, put them together. I think they should let it ride out until we have a couple tribes down to like 3 people each. That's just personal opinion on how it should do. I just feel like the 1 episode is such, but this is the first winter to have to deal with 4 tribes starting out. And in a way, it is an advantage. You know, the young men, are they going to lose that first challenge? High likelihood of not. But it is something that it goes into, you know, who you're with on the island the first day seems to have a great effect, especially in these first 25 seasons of who you end up going to the end of the game with. And Aras, from my recollection, doesn't go to the end of the game with all the young guys. They get voted out early merge.
Well, that had a lot to do with the tribe swap. Bob Dog was the only one he ended up with, and then Austin and Nick ended up on the other side. And Bob Dog got in trouble because he was drinking the wine in the bathroom. Him and Bruce, and so Bob Dog ends up going home. But yeah, Aras, this was kind of the birth. It was Bob Dog going home, and Cerise stayed. And that was really the birth of the Kasaya 6. That was it. That was who it was going to be the rest of the game. I forget exactly how it went because Panama was not one I just rewatched. But I remember that, like, the way it was they split it up 7-7. One person went to exile, and that person came to the tribe that lost. And I think it was their tribe, I believe, that lost, and they voted out Melinda because I remember Melinda and Sari just sitting there being like, oh my God, who's going home out of the 2 of us? It's one of us, and there's nothing we can do about it. And Melinda goes home, Sari stays, and then that tribe got another person. So they actually weren't at a disadvantage at all by losing that challenge. They end up going back to 7-7. And I always say that's like an unbelievably unfair thing that happens, especially since when they go into the merge, it's 6-4. But it was Bob Dog going home that started the birth of the Kasaya 6. And I believe, and I'm going to look this right now, I believe Aras did vote for Bob Dog, which, oh no, he didn't vote for Bob Dog. He voted for Bruce. And Shane actually votes for Aras in this tribal. And this is the one where Bob Dog goes home, but, you know, all over the place. But still, like, that was like a pretty defining moment for Aras, because to have somebody from your original tribe go when everything else was kind of shaping up for everybody else. Courtney, you know, she had it was Courtney, Shane, Sari, Aras, Bruce, and Danielle. So Danielle and Courtney had each other. Bruce and Shane had each other. And now Aras, by losing Bob Dog, has nobody. And that's when he starts to kind of build his relationship with Sari, which ultimately ends up being the most important relationship he could build in the game.
I want to say I'm a big fan of Danielle DiLorenzo this season. I feel like she gets underrated a lot, even though she goes to Heroes vs. Villains. So anyways, just want to throw that one out there randomly. Aras also is the sole survivor with the most votes ever received against him. He has 9. Technically, Ben got 11, but he used hidden immunity idols to negate a lot of those votes. So Aras is the only one who has the most votes against him actually counted. And he, as a winner, he has the most with 9. So I think it's another thing. Aras wasn't like, he was targeted. He didn't like slide to the end. He wasn't under the radar in that sense.
Yeah,
it was the whole post merge.
Battering rams.
Yeah, absolutely. It was that whole post merge where everybody was just going at it was Aras. Everybody on Terry's side was just voting for Aras over and over and over.
And Terry just laid it on Aras. Terry gave him 4 out of like his 9 votes, I think.
Yeah. I think you're right. And I mean, at the end of the day, and I know Alexa and I, we're on different sides of the Terry Aras fight, but at the end of the day, I do think that that's Terry's way of showing respect to Aras, which he never outwardly shows it, but to constantly vote for him, it's saying like, I know you're the top dog. Like, I know it's you, and I don't have to worry about Shane or Bruce or Courtney or Danielle, maybe Suri, but he was definitely not looking at Suri as a threat. He knew it was Aras, and then Aras ends up winning.
I think it's also Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is really quick, but what I do enjoy about the rivalry is that even though they become like bickering housewives half the time, like there is this undertone of respect for one another, and I think that's really cool. You don't always see that.
I do think another thing we need to mention with Aras is that I know Exile Island technically existed in Palau as a one-off thing that they threw together real quick, but Exile Island this is like the first proper implementation of Exile Island with the hidden immunity idol that Aras does not get, so he has to manage a legit hidden immunity idol in someone's hands that is powerful, and has to deal with the fact that Exile Island exists. Going to Exile Island here is not like Stephanie going. It actually can affect your game. Can affect, especially if you need to talk to somebody like, well, now they're gone, or you're the one on exile. It's just something that he had to manage that no winner previously has had to manage.
Yeah, and that's why I can say now, like, it took me a while to kind of get on the Aras train, but I'm on it because. What was it? It was Bruce got medevaced, but Terry won every single other immunity challenge except for the one where, there was no immunity when Bruce got medevaced. So he wins the first 5 of the season. At Final Four, Terry can't get votes because he has this super idol.
Yeah.
We
need to mention it is a super idol because we always think of Cook Islands and Cagayan, but no, there's a super idol here in season 12.
Exactly. And so Aras had like no chances to get rid of Terry. In no shots. And then the best part of this season is the fact that Danielle DiLorenzo has both of their fates in her hands at the very end, and she ends up picking Aras over Terry just because she liked Aras more than Terry.
I think that's such a key thing, though, is Aras, I mean, just like many winners before Aras who convinced eventually the loser to take them to the end, is like, does the loser know they're going to lose by picking this person? Not always. And in Aras's case, good on him for having Danielle convinced to bring him to the end. Though it's a little bit easier because Terry was on such a roll with it was obviously Terry was a bigger target than Aras. Danielle
was going to lose 6-1 no matter who she went up against. She was not going to get anybody's vote.
I mean, she lost 5-2 here, so.
Well, was it 5-2? Well, she was going to lose whatever it was. She was going to lose by the same margin or more to Terry. Like, it was going to be the same. Nobody was going to.
Who voted for Danielle?
Let me double check.
It was Bruce.
Yes.
It was Bruce was one and Shane. Yeah, Bruce and Shane.
Shane's crazy.
Because Shane and Aras just argued, and again, like. That shows how good Aras was at the jury management phase of Survivor, which is something that then we again see in Blood versus Water when he still has his legs. Like, I was really concerned, like when Aras come back, I'm like, we really want to watch Aras play again. And we saw that he still had the strategic chops to play Survivor. And the jury management phase of this game is so great because you had people who were bitter, who were straight up going to hate you when you voted them out. I mean, that was Shane. Bruce didn't get voted out, but he had to keep Courtney on his side enough. Otherwise, Courtney was just going to be like, screw you, man. I hate you. Get the hell out of here. I don't want to talk to you. Get out of my face. Like, that's a hard thing to manage when you're working with a bitter bunch. And you have to get Terry to vote for you and Austin and Sally. Like, so 3 people who already don't like you are on the jury. And you have to keep your alliance liking you enough. That's really, really crazy. I mean, that's really impressive.
Yeah. It all goes back to just managing how much other people hate each other.
Yeah.
It's really impressive.
Can we mention also Aras went into Final Tribal Council with the biggest injury out of any winner to ever be in Final Tribal Council with all that glass. I mean, I read he got 7 stitches from when he slipped and
that's right.
Yeah, we slipped on a rock.
That's like, people do not talk about that.
And they were celebrating.
Yeah. I mean, just the fact that it happened not during a challenge is just like
just got too drunk on champagne and
I love
smashed your glass. I forget exactly what happened.
You and me, Daniel.
Yeah.
I got $1 million that'll fix these stitches.
I totally forgot about that. That's amazing. I always forget that happened, and it is so funny. But
the same day as Final Tribal, so like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, we should go get medically evacuated.
Oh, Daniel wins by default.
That would be amazing. That'd be like
that would be a first.
That would be amazing. So another thing though too is like when we look at Aras and what he had to overcome, and Jenna got a lot of shit for this in Amazon because she was the pretty girl. Oh no, how could you ever be the pretty? But Aras had to overcome this young, kind of spoiled. I don't know if he was considered spoiled, but he definitely had the young, like people felt that he had like the very privileged. He's got it easy. He's got it so, and that was why
he's a good dude.
He's a 24-year-old living with his parents, and this is what Shane rips him apart for, essentially being like, you suck. Why would I give you $1 million? And I think that's why him and Terry butted heads, because it's a generational thing. I mean, if you were to say now that somebody was living with their parents at 24 and then went out and played Survivor, you'd be like, yeah, okay, they're a 24-year-old who's living with their parents.
Like, oh my God, you're saving so much money. I should have done that.
Yeah. Like nobody would question it. But back in 2006, I guess is when this aired, everybody was like, how could you be 24 living at home? It's like, because that's what I'm choosing to do. But he had to overcome that. And with a jury that was a little bit more established, he was definitely the least established out of that jury. You had Terry, Bruce, Shane, Courtney was, even established in her own way. Sari, Austin was a writer, so he'll never be established. And then you had Sally. So when you look at like everybody, he had to really like push his own personality and be like, this is why it's okay, me being weird and doing my yoga and my weird meditation and stuff. Trust me, guys, like I still deserve this and I'm still a cool guy and all of that. And it worked for him. It really did.
I remember that in the Amazon where Roger Sexton talked about how Rob Cesternino does karaoke in his basement. He's like, and it's just pathetic. And I'm like
that's cool.
That was pre-YouTube. I mean, nowadays.
Yeah. He'd be an influencer now.
Yeah, exactly. he would be on TikTok. Rob was doing TikTok in his basement.
Yeah, TikTok. Rob has a TikTok.
Rob, there you go. Rob has a TikTok.
I was going to say, where's Roger Sexton's podcast? Anybody know where that is?
I actually, curiously, I posted my video today that I just posted. It was about the men versus women twist from the Amazon on my channel, and I posted on a Facebook group there, and somebody's like, oh, Rob was such a villain, I hate him. And I'm like, funny enough, and I linked them to his podcast, and they're like, whoa, and I don't want to, I'm paraphrasing here, but no kidding is what they said, different words. But I thought it's just funny how some people, I mean, Rob seems like such a mainstay to us, but even people have forgotten him. Oh yeah, even people who are like in Survivor groups on Facebook aren't aware of it. But I wanted to bring something up. So we talked about how many confessionals each winner's got, and I want to mention that in Borneo, the total number of confessionals is 657, and then we get to Panama, and it's exactly 400.
So that's a big drop.
That is a massive drop.
Let's follow that at the fourth of every week.
And then in Cook Islands, it drops to 372. So it's not even like that's the lowest. So how many confessionals do you think Aras got over the season? Over
56.
How many did
Daniel got? Danny got 41. Tom got 59. Chris got 71.
I think Aras got like 46. I don't think he got much.
Very close. He got 45.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I was looking at Yule. My bad. I run now next time. Aras got 48.
Wow, that's amazing.
Very close.
Amazing that you only got 45, but we'll talk about that because Cook Islands is a very weirdly edited season because all the good characters go out pre-merge and they give them huge edits. But yeah, I think that's interesting. Like where Aras, another one, didn't get it. And this is again, like when I'm watching a movie, when I'm watching a TV show, I mean, for Breaking Bad fans, if Walter White dies in the first season, what is Breaking Bad? You know what I mean? And so not that Terry dies in the first episode here, but the fact that like he does not succeed, him and Sari were our protagonists of this season.
Oh, definitely.
And we needed one of those two to win. And when neither one of them win, it's like, how did this guy, who we don't really care all that much about, but when you rewatch it, you care about him more. But when you were watching this live, nobody was rooting for Aras, nobody was rooting for Danielle, and nobody was rooting for Courtney. People thought Shane was a nutcase, so if he wins, whatever. People wanted Sari to win, and people wanted Terry to win. It was pretty much, were you on the Terry side of things or the Sari side of things? But nobody wanted Danielle or Aras to win. So when it was the two of them in the final two, I mean, that finale is honestly a very disappointing finale when you really think about it from a viewer perspective. That's it. Yeah, so that's what I say about that. There was one other thing I wanted to say about Aras, and I totally forgot what it was going to be. Oh, and then what I wanted to say is Aras, I believe, is somebody who does not take a hit because of his next game. I think he played very well in Blood versus Water as one of the only winners, or the only winner out there. I'm completely drawing a blank on the Blood versus Water cast right now, but as the only winner, second, there were two winners because Tina was there. That's right. But as one of the only winners out there. What was that, Alexa?
No, Tyson was not a winner. Duh.
Tyson wasn't a winner yet.
Not yet.
but out of all, like, being somebody who comes back, plays on a not all winner season as a winner, to do as well as he did is impressive. And him and Tyson really were. That was Tyson's biggest adversary was Aras, and that's why he gets voted out as early as he did, because Tyson was trying to get him out of the game. And I loved his storyline with Vitas. It's the reason Vitas was an all-star and was on second chance. And obviously we saw what happened with that, but that relationship really was everything. And I actually think Aras gained a following rather than lost it because of his performance in Blood versus Water, because the personality and the real human side of Aras that we didn't get to see in Panama, we really got to see in Blood versus Water.
And it helped. Of course, that his brother was there in Blood versus Water to help bring out that human side, because Vitas revealed a bunch of things to us. I don't think Aras would have ever told us otherwise, honestly.
I think Aras benefits from having the rival each season.
Yeah.
Oh, someone just mentioned, we totally skipped over it. I think we talked about All-Stars, how Rupert won $1 million. Rupert was considered America's Sole Survivor. I mean, we should probably briefly mention that.
Oh, yeah, that's true. We didn't say that. So that shows you how much things have changed over time, though, because now people can't stand Rupert. And I was mad that Aras won season 12. But back then, being mad that Aras won season 12 and Rupert winning $1 million for being like America's hero, it's interesting how perspectives change over the course of 20 years as Alexa rolls her eyes so far to the back of her head.
Rupert is not today.
Look, he is America's Sole Survivor, Alexa. You need to accept this.
Yeah. That didn't cause a rift between the cast members at all. All right, so can Aras's game still win?
Oh, definitely. Aras almost played like the foil to Terry. Like, it was like, well, we got to keep Aras in a sense because he's the only one who can beat Terry, and Terry's on a roll. Aras was he wasn't the biggest threat in the game, and he played under the radar, but he made the social bonds needed to win 5-2. And I think the bigger question is, does Aras beat Terry in the final two? What do you think?
No, he gets smoked.
You think he gets smoked?
I think he gets smoked.
I think he loses because Shane didn't like him. Like,
Sally votes for Terry, Austin votes for Terry, Bruce votes for Terry, Shane votes for Terry. It doesn't even matter what the other three do. He's getting those 4 votes.
I mean, it's high likelihood. But it's just one of those things. It's like Rob versus Jenna and Amazon. We will never truly know how things will pan out. And I don't trust when they do those votes at the reunion. Like, you just got done watching the edited season. Of course, however you're voting, whatever. So
absolutely. But Alexa, you were going to say something with that. But like, do you disagree with any of those? Because I feel like Sari was obviously never going to vote for Terry. But other than that, what do you think?
I think Aras totally loses to Terry.
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. Yeah, because they all hated each other. And so I think, like, going back to the previous question of can Aras win again, I think he can, because I think he kind of inadvertently has the Adam Klein strategy of be the most normal person or be the most average person. Mm-hmm. He wasn't the challenge beast. That was Terry. He wasn't the one with like the big underdog story. That was Sari. He was not the most obnoxious person. That was Shane and Courtney. Mm-hmm. So he could just be available and be like the voice of reason for a lot of people. So I think that's why he wins.
Okay, so follow-up question. Does Sari beat Terry or does Terry beat Sari? Because I feel like those are like really who everyone was rooting for going into this.
I think Sari probably beats Terry.
Sari wins.
Yeah, that would have been close though.
Everyone hated each other, but everyone loved Sari.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they would have. I think that would have been the most interesting final two, and that's what everybody wanted to see as a final two. I mean, that would have made Panama a top 5 season. But it's tough to go back. I mean, what Aras did, Aras is kind of like Ethan. it's not the most exciting game. Obviously, Ethan had more of a fan base, but it's not the most exciting game. And there's a lot more entertaining characters around you, but you won. And you did what you needed to do as yourself to win the game. And that's what I give Aras a lot of respect for being able to pull that off.
Yeah. Let's give Danielle Di Lorenzo respect, please. She is a hero. Okay.
She's a villain.
She's a villain.
She was a villain? How did I forget? Are you serious?
Yeah, Candace was the hero.
Yeah.
What?
How
did I forget this?
That's the best.
We'll get to them.
In what universe is okay? You know what, Survivor? We'll talk about that when we get to Heroes versus Villains. I feel like we need to briefly mention the casting and how they got labeled. Villain Danielle, whatever.
Well, it was because Terry helped her make immunity, and then she turned around and voted him off at the next, or make fire, and then she voted him off.
Well, Terry, that was Jeff's reasoning. It doesn't matter who it was.
That was Jeff's reasoning.
If Suri votes out Terry, is she a villain? Yeah, that would go over like a fart in church.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Suri should be a villain. I stand by that. Like, I think we should talk about this when we get to season 20. But when Parvati's like, Jeff, why am I a villain and Suri's a hero? Like, fantastic.
Suri's a very sweet villain. That's the difference.
Exactly. He's got the giggle.
That's it. I'm trying to think. I swear I had something else to say about Aras, but anyway, I don't. I think that his style of play is a style that could definitely still win in modern Survivor. I think we've seen something similar to it. Tommy kind of had it where, he had a big alliance of people behind him. And it's hard to say because you're not ever going to have a Cassius 6, but when you have a big alliance of people and you're the head of it, but everybody's more worried about each other, that's the Aras game. And that's exactly what Tommy did. So I think that that's definitely something that we could still see. And I think that's a really good strategy. I think it's one that really works. I don't think Aras even knew that that's what he was pulling off on his season, which is what makes it tough. Like when you're like, how do you rank Aras? I don't think he realized it. I think in Blood versus Water, he did realize how he could win. But at that point, he just had too much of a target on his back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I you know, though, this set of 4 winners we just talked about is like such a unique set of winners. Like none of them are the same as the other. We talked about like the first 4 winners that each evolved each other's strategies. In this case, I feel like everyone's playing just different strategies because they have different circumstances. And this is really where Survivor gets into like how they change the circumstance of each season with like Exile Island or no merge. And that was their hands kind of forced on that one. And then having returning players come into your season, like stuff that none of these like early winners had to deal with that now is like totally different circumstances. So you have to play a different game. Even though at its core, it's still a social game. And I'll give it that. Like Survivor here is still mostly a social game. The Hidden Immunity Idol does not change how this is still a social game.
Yeah, not yet.
Not yet. So now,
hasn't changed the game to the extent that it has now, but yeah.
But
even though it has Super Idol.
Well, in our next episode, we will be talking about how the Immunity Idol definitely changes the game. Because we're going to be talking about the winners of Cook Islands, Fiji, China, and Micronesia, which I believe, in my opinion, while I love the group we just talked about, and I think this is a more fun group to talk about, that group of 4 is probably the 4 best winners in a row that Survivor has ever had. There is not one of them that you can be like, they weren't that good. So that'll be a really fun talk. I'm really looking forward to doing that one because they are all amazing. And then we start getting to a point where I'm like, you know what, guys, maybe we should go back and do seasons 1 through 16.
I think Gabon through Heroes vs. Villains is still a great stretch, unless you're talking about after Heroes vs. Villains.
I'm kind of talking about that.
Definitely talking about that.
I'm definitely talking about seasons 21 through 25.
20. Yeah. No, I agree. I was to say, like, even though Gabon's a mess, it's a fun mess to talk about. So
I love Gabon. Yeah, no, I'm all about Gabon. But so anyway, that's all I think we got for tonight, right? Have I missed anything, or we got anything else?
Subscribe to my channel. I do Survivor content.
Tell us what you're working on right now. Tell us what videos
you guys will be. Everyone here is going to be so excited. Next week, the Rob Sesternino story video releases next Monday. So before this podcast happens again, it will be released, and it's 46 minutes long. It's a real banger, let me tell you. So
I'm all about it, man. I love Rob. Love watching him on Amazon.
And then I have the week after that, I'm going to do a follow-up video about why Rob Sesternino lost, because I think it's more complex than what you see in the show with like, well, Jenna just didn't take him. And we did talk about this when we talked about the Amazon, like how all the mistakes Rob made and how, like, if he it's stuff that we're almost like Rob should have known not to do, but he did because he's human. So I have so in 2 weeks, I'm going to talk about why Rob Cesternino lost and how he could have won. But next week is his big fat story video.
Big fat story video.
Fat story.
So yeah, everyone follow Once Upon an Island on YouTube. He's on all forms of social media. Just type in Once Upon an Island and you will find him. But another way that you'll be able to find him is by tuning in this exact same place next week at 9 p.m. Eastern. We are going to be talking about an awesome stretch of 4 winners. Going to talk about Yule, Earl, Todd, and Parvati. Great group of 4 there. So make sure to tune in. We're going to be doing this every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern until like mid-August. So keep tuning in. Let us know what you're thinking.
Don't you guys have something this week, maybe? Or no?
No, we don't know.
Yeah, we're possibly. We'll see.
Okay.
So follow us on social media to find out. Everyone have a great week. Wash your hands, and we'll see you next week.
Bye. Everyone.